Is pride a challenge for you? Welcome to the Parable Podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and joining me today is personal trainer and speaker, Emily Reilly. Emily opens up about her journey of living with chronic illness and how it has shaped her faith.
Because I've had opportunities, even with my MS, which is interesting. I think often we think like sometimes like a diagnosis or a loss or something can be something that like drags us down, but it's actually kind of been this platform.
Here's my conversation with Emily Reilly. So excited to introduce you to Emily Reilly. Emily and I met recently through a mutual friend. I was able to interview Emily on a panel at a baton pass event. Thank you, Kelly Olson. So Emily, welcome to the Parable Podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It's always so fun to join people on their podcasts. And I just love the way that the Lord works and how our lives kind of came together. And here we are.
Yes, here we are. Well, Emily, this episode is airing in January. And so I'd love to know as you think about January, people are like, okay, this is the new year, new you. Is there any kind of practices or tools or ideas that you put into place every January for yourself?
Actually, yes. I don't know how long I've been doing this for, maybe like 3 years or so. There's this wonderful author, Jenny Allen, if you're familiar with her. She does the If Gathering, things like that. And she had put out this, I think it's called a dream book. Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Dream guide. I think
Dream
it's a
guide.
Dream guide.
Yes. That she provides for people that's free. And I love it because what it does is it kind of like reflects on your past year, and it kind of goes through lots of different things, your relationships, finances, work, career, and then your dreams. And then it also looks forward. And I think that's something that I love to do every year, just as a way to kind of like recap what the Lord did in the past year and like what my dreams are for the future. And it's kind of an interesting season in life anyways. It's kind of been a hard year. And so it'll be interesting to like look back, but also see like the silver linings and like where God was just so faithful, but then also what's to come and anticipating that. And sometimes I like to pick a word sometimes. And then I'm also a fitness instructor. So, I think it's always fun for me to hopefully help people get motivated to stay accountable and moving their body in whatever way works for them.
Emily, is reflection or just like dreaming, is that hard for you? Is that something that is natural, or is that something you've learned over time?
Well, I'm a journaler. If you were to come into my basement, I literally have boxes and boxes of journals. And the reason why I've like always loved journaling is because I think it's like capturing moments, prayer requests, just whatever it is. And I often will go back and like reread. And I think there's this song that we've been singing at church, and it talks about having these like Ebenezers, or these like moments in time where moments to remember God's faithfulness. And I think that that's kind of what like journals and a reflection is for me, because I think often we can get so overwhelmed with life and the things that are like stressing us out or causing us anxiety or just losses or grief or whatever. And so those moments are just reminders that like God is so faithful, even in the hard stuff, even in the sorrow. But dreaming is kind of hard. I don't know if you know much about Enneagram, but I'm a 3. And so sometimes I can get caught in like what's next rather than like being present. So it's this like constant battle of trying to be present, but also dreaming.
Yes. So. Same. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fellow 3s unite.
Yeah. It's just like, I want to dream, but also I find myself like, okay, let me just quick write a to-do list down, or let me just do this and then I'll get to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is hard for me. But I want to. I'm learning. I'm growing. The journal thing, I have a good amount of journals too. And I have 2 or 3 journals that I had when I was in high school. And it wasn't every day, but oh my gosh, we got those out with my 13-year-old. We read them the other year. If you want a good laugh, like it is so funny. But I think for me, some of these journals, whether they're like every day or more like what you just said, prayer requests, you can see God's faithfulness because, gosh, we're so forgetful, or we're just like, where have you been? So I love that. If you can think back through 2023, what would be 1 or 2 things that you are most proud of?
I feel like I have been in this season of saying yes. Mm-hmm. And because we recently moved to Illinois from DC, which changed my career, which for me, I think often I can get caught up in an identity of like, what's my job, And so this year has kind of been this year of yes, and just really saying yes to whatever opportunities the Lord has for me. And I think that that's just been like a really sweet time of letting go of maybe what I thought life should look like or what my job should be. And it has allowed me me to have some really, really sweet opportunities, from being a counselor at a camp for teenagers who live with multiple sclerosis, to saying yes to being able to go rock climbing, or starting a podcast with my sisters has been such a gift. It's something that we've kind of like dreamed about. And we finally were like, let's do it. Like, why not? If it's just us talking every week, then that's great. And so I think it's just kind of been this really sweet season of just, saying yes and like really allowing the Lord to just kind of guide my steps and open doors that I never thought I would have. And so I'm just like really proud of myself for like letting go of like some of those expectations and just seeing where he takes me. And it's definitely an exciting journey, but I also feel like I'm in this season of like manna. Like the Lord is literally providing like day by day. I've been subbing for the local school district and being like, you know what, like these kids that are in these classes is like where the Lord wants me. And if I have an opportunity to like love on them or encourage them or just listen to them, then that's what he has for me today. And so that's kind of what I'm proud about.
As you think forward as the opposite of yes, is there anything you're like, you know what, I want to make sure to say no to this as we go into 2024?
I tend to pack my schedule. I like to be busy, mostly because it makes me feel like I have purpose, but I really want to be intentional with what takes up my time. Yeah. And so to say no to things that, whether they don't bring me joy or really feel like that's where the Lord's taking me. And so I really want to be like more prayerful about whatever opportunities come my way, to what I'm saying yes to is intentional and the motivations are right. Because I think I can, like I said, can get caught up in like, I just want to do and be and bring in, income or whatever, but I want it to be really purposeful and intentional so that I can make space for other things.
Thanks for just dreaming and like thinking over and reflecting your life. Everyone wonders like, how do you come up with these questions? I'm like, sometimes it just comes to me. Like, I'm just like, let's just go in this track. But I think these are the questions that we can all ask ourselves. It doesn't have to be fancy. Like, what am I saying yes to right now? What am I saying no? And then how are you feeling about it? I mean, it's just that simple. I think Jesus, he did such a great job of asking questions, making people like really think, not really always giving the answers, because sometimes we need to really process through those things. And also, he was a great storyteller. And that's why I love parables. That's why we have this podcast. And so, Emily, I'd love for you to share with us one of your parable stories so we can learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's so many different facets of my life that I could share, but I think the one that's like probably most in my face or on my heart these days is my journey of living with a chronic illness. If we were to kind of go back, I'm very tall. I'm over 6 feet tall. And I always like to say that my height didn't go to waste. I grew up in the mountains of Arizona and I was like really active, as an athlete and loved being outdoors, but my ultimate dream was to go play college soccer. And that was like the dream. And then life really took a bit of a detour that has just kind of become a huge part of my testimony. I was a senior in high school. I had just signed a soccer scholarship with Dallas Baptist University. And, I really wanted to go to a Christian school, mostly to kind of keep me on track spiritually, because when you leave home, your faith really becomes your own. And I just felt like DBU was the place for me. Their school verse ended up being a total confirmation that that's where I needed to be. It was Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. And I had no idea that a month after signing a soccer scholarship that verse would be something that I would cling to, that would bring me a lot of encouragement, because after I signed a 4-year soccer scholarship, I was running at practice and noticed my legs were really heavy. And I was just experiencing a lot of interesting symptoms, like weird symptoms, a lot of fatigue. We thought it was mono, but because of some previous neurologic history a few years prior, they did an MRI, and that's when they found multiple lesions on my spine, diagnosing me with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, which is a disease of the central nervous system that impacts your brain, your spinal cord, optic nerves. And that diagnosis was totally life-changing. Mostly, I didn't know much about MS. I didn't really know anybody with MS other than a few folks who used a wheelchair. And so that was really scary. And I just really found myself at this point in life, like, what's my life going to look like? Lord, what about my soccer scholarship? Can I still stay active? Like, what are you doing? Yeah. And that's when that verse was like, Emily, I have plans for you, like to prosper you, not to harm you. So anyways, I decided to take the disease head on with faith and determination and refuse to let it stop me. And just this few days ago, I celebrated 18 years of living well with MS. And I think it's just something that the Lord has really used not only in my life to humble me and to remind me that apart from him, I can do nothing, but also an opportunity to come alongside people who are newly diagnosed or who are living with MS to encourage them, to let them know that they're not alone and that you really can live well with MS. And it's all about redefining what your new normal is and what success looks like. And it has been a journey of ripping away pride, but also just really seeing how like the Lord can really use our trials to help us impact others and to bring him glory at the end of the day. So it's kind of a very quick synopsis of that.
Wow. That's really beautiful. I love that. That is the school's life verse and how God uses all of that. And even when you were saying that, you know, before you even started your story, you said you get caught up in the idea of like your identity and what you're doing. And here you go into school, like, I want to be a soccer player. Like, that's what I'm doing, collegiate soccer. And God's like, okay, let me just remind you of your identity. So I'd love to know at 18, that's a hard blow. So tell me what you were feeling initially in that moment.
You know, I still felt like a little bit invincible. Like, I don't really know what this diagnosis means. Like, we'll just kind of go and play. And here's what ended up happening though. My freshman year in college, the cool part of the story is that the Lord actually I have a teammate who had MS on my soccer team. And so it allowed my coaches to kind of like modify my training schedule so that I could be as successful as I could. And my freshman year, I did really well and I actually became an All-American goalkeeper, which is like the highest award that a college athlete can receive, which probably didn't help my pride much. One aspect, it was like, this is so cool. Like, despite MS, I can like still be an all-star, you know. But even in that, like, later on, my senior year, we brought in a new coach. She brought in a new goalkeeper and I got sat for the first time in like 16 years of playing soccer. And it was really, really hard mentally and for my self-confidence and my identity. But it was exactly what I needed because the Lord was like, Emily, you are not just a soccer player. Like, you are so much more than this. And so what ended up happening was I didn't play much my last few years, which, you know, probably caused some bitterness if I'm totally honest. Yes. But it also allowed me to step into a role that I wasn't really anticipating. And that was being a spiritual leader for my team and just like being an encouragement to the girls and pray, like really making prayer and just being that kind of a leader. And I'm super thankful for that because I think sometimes we do get caught up in whatever that identity, whether it's being a mom or being a career woman or an athlete or fill in the blank. And sometimes the Lord has to painfully take that out of our hands. And that's what happened to me. And so I think I've somewhat learned my lesson. Like, the Lord has reminded me every once in a while of some that humbling, but I think it was just a good reminder of like, Emily, you're so much more than that. And this season will soon end. Then what's next? You know, and I think that that's like an important lesson. So it's a constant journey, but I'm super thankful too.
Talk to me a little bit about pride, what that looks like for you and how, you know, you kind of have broken that down. Because I feel like even though we can say like, oh, that's been a hard thing for me, like it's a constant thing. Like, we always have to work on. We're never like, oh, I've arrived and I've overcome pride and I'll never have to deal with it again. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a constant struggle for sure. I wish I could say like, I'm now forever humble, but then there's pride again, you know? Okay, so this one moment, it will be forever ingrained in my mind. In college, I participated in FCA, which is the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I remember this one person who spoke. And when she prayed this awesome prayer that I always pray anytime I do anything was like, Lord, hide me behind your cross. Because at the end of the day, whatever I am doing, I want people to see you and not me. Like, when my heart is in that healthy place, like that ultimately is my heart. Like, I want Jesus to be made known. I want it to be for his glory. Because I've had opportunities, even with my MS, which is interesting. I think often we think like sometimes like a diagnosis or a loss or something can be something that like drags us down, but it's actually kind of been this platform that I've been able to use. I speak around the country for different things as like a patient advocate and things like that. And it's just really cool to be like, okay, Lord, like here's an opportunity for me to get in front of people. And I may not be able to like talk about you specifically, but if I can encourage people and they can experience your presence or your peace or your hope, that's awesome. And when my heart is in that right place, like that's the exciting part, to be like, man, Lord, like people get to experience you today. And that's always my prayer. Anytime I do anything is like, hide me behind your cross. And so I think it's just like a constant check of my motivations and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because as a 3, you know, I often think of like, or it's like that highlight reel, or, you know, we're only our greatest last accomplishment. But when we're in a healthy place, like, it's like, look, Lord, I'm enough because you are the one that is the source of whatever, my talents, success, and everything. But it's a constant struggle. So yeah, mostly praying for like, okay, Lord, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is it for your glory? Then I will step into it.
How has God made MS, and this, I'm sure you had to come to like grips with this for a while. How has God made MS a blessing for you?
In a lot of ways, actually. I think one of the biggest blessings that I've seen when it comes to MS is just the people he's brought into my life. You know, there's something really special about getting to meet people with a shared experience who just get it. You know, when you say like, man, I'm really fatigued, or man, I just experienced so much pain today, or cognitive or whatever symptoms, like for people who live with MS, they just get it. And so that's just like a really special thing, and knowing that you're not alone. And so over the last 18 years, so many people have come into my life, and it's just such a gift, and it's just so cool. Like, one of the things that I love, like I like to say that I'm somewhat of like I love networking. I love meeting people, connecting with people. I'm a woo on Strength Finders. So I'm always like, what connects us and what can bond us? And so it's just been such a sweet gift of like the people that the Lord has brought into my life. And it's just really special, like, because of the baton pass, you know, there were a couple of people who attended or who got connected to me afterwards. And it's just like, that is the power of sharing our stories and being vulnerable and sharing some of these parts of our lives, because then you can just like bring other people into the fold and like link arms and continue moving forward, because, you know, we're stronger together. And so that's been a huge blessing. And I think it's made me appreciate things too, like little things. I don't enjoy running. Like, it doesn't like bring me joy, but I do it because I can, and I do it because I want to run on behalf of those who cannot. And so it's like those kinds of things where I'm like, Lord, thank you that you allowed me a body to continue to run a 5K or whatever. You know, it's like appreciating the little things, I think sometimes comes with a diagnosis or things like that.
For someone who has like a friend or a family member who has chronic illness, what would you say would be like the best way that we can support them? Because sometimes we just really don't know. And this is like something you live with day to day. So what would be your like tips or ideas, how best to support them?
No, it's a really good question. And I think that it's sometimes can be a little bit of a personal thing where some people are like, don't ask me about it. You know, I don't want it to define me. Me neither. Like, I don't want it to define me. But it's also really nice when people ask me like, hey, how are you doing today? Like, how's your MS been? Because I think often with like MS, for example, like a lot of my symptoms are invisible. So nobody even knows that I'm experiencing pain or fatigue, or I lost my vision in college. Like a lot of these things you just like can't see. And so sometimes it can feel like you're being dismissed, or that, oh, she's fine. Like, she doesn't look sick, so she's fine. And so I think sometimes like, and I think this goes with anything, you know, even like mental health, like really asking people, hey, how are you doing? And allowing that space to be able to share and to listen and to not try to fix, but to be like, hey, how can I help you today? Like, whether that's like, can we just get food out today? Because I just don't have the energy to cook. But also like never stop learning. You know, if I love providing resources for people because I really want to empower them. Like, knowledge is power. And so if you can learn a little bit more about said diagnosis or whatever, it can be really helpful, because then we feel acknowledged and seen. And I think for the people who live with a chronic illness, my encouragement to you is give people grace, because they don't understand. And I think that that's often, we can get a little offended if people say something wrong or don't help us out. And I think that's a place where we can extend grace to, because they don't understand. As you think about the word grace over the last 18 years, how has your relationship with God changed? Because obviously we hope that we all grow in our faith, but there is a difference from the 18-year-old Emily till now of what you've learned, what you've recognized, how God has been with you. I just feel like there's just like, it's like roots, like a depth kind of is happening, where things that I knew, you know, I grew up in a Christian home, but it wasn't until my diagnosis and then like moving away from home and all of that, like where those roots really started to go deep, like really deep. And if I'm totally honest, even in the last 18 years, like my relationship with the Lord has kind of also ebbed and flowed. Things in life happen and you can become not lukewarm, sort of, but like where you're just like, man, Lord, I have not spent time with you. And when I'm not spending time with the Lord, like, it's just like any friend, like, how are you supposed to like deepen a relationship if you're not spending time with them? And so there've definitely been seasons in my life where, Lord, it's been like 5 months since I've journaled, or whatever. But I think what I've realized is like his grace is, and his mercies are new every day. And it just like, he always has these open arms, like wherever you're at, just like run to him. I mean, and in life in general, I think one thing that's always been important and necessary for me is like accountability. And whether that's like being a part of a small group to doing a Bible study, or sometimes like on my, social media, I'll put out a challenge because I need that too. Like I need those reminders to be like, hey, put the Lord first, like dig into his word today. But his grace is just, I'm just so thankful for it because I can see it everywhere. I like the idea of like the Lord's fingerprints in like everything. And I truly have seen that in my life, from my diagnosis to the way I met my husband to every facet of life. Like, it's just so fun when we have those eyes to see the way that the Lord is working.
You said that there's been like so many people that you've gotten to connect and talk with. What story or what person has really stuck out? And you're like, wow, like this was totally a God moment.
Well, I think the most recent one, which was like really, really special, I'm on social media and I post things mostly just to hopefully encourage people. When I was invited to come up to Chicago to speak at the Baton Pass, I was like, I don't really know anybody in Chicago. I mean, I live in Southern Illinois, but I was like, I'll post it. You never know. And so I posted like, hey, I'll be in Chicago speaking. And I get a private message from somebody and they're like, hey, I've been following you for the last 3 years. I was diagnosed with MS like 5 years ago, and you've just been such an encouragement. And I would love to come to this event. Like, this sounds like exactly up my alley. And it was really cool. So she ended up attending the event, and it was just really special because for her in her season of life, I was the first person she had met living with MS around her age. And that can feel really lonely and isolating, thinking like, I don't know anybody and I just feel so alone. And so I think it was just like that moment being like the Lord saying like, see, Emily, like, I'm using you. I'm using this story. You're just like this vessel to like bring other people in. And so that was just such a gift to be able to connect. And it's just like moments like that where you're like, you just never know who's watching you. You never know how your vulnerabilities will encourage other people. And she's just one of many. And so it's just every time I get to meet people, it's just like my friend group expands and my heart expands like the Grinch, like it just 10 sizes bigger, so.
Yeah, I love that idea of, it almost sounds like covert, like you just never know who's watching. But I think that's the beauty. And that's, why I feel so passionate about people sharing stories. And obviously you want to do that in safe spaces, and maybe you don't have to share everything. But when we like step into our vulnerability, when we step into those places, I feel like it brings healing to other people, not only to them, but also to us. It helps us kind of remove that pride. It removes these identity things and like shifts that focus back onto the cross, like you said. I guess, Emily, what would be one of like the things that God is still continuing to help you learn in this season of your life?
I don't know. I think the thing that he's just like constantly reminding me is of his faithfulness, that he always provides and he will always guide. Because I think that that's kind of like constantly my prayer, like, Lord, just provide and guide. And I look back in my journals and I know it's true. I've seen him do it time and time and time again. He like never fails us. But even in that same breath, it's like, what are you doing, Lord? I don't think you see me, And so I think it's like, that's probably like the constant reminder. And one thing I'm just so thankful for, back like during the pandemic, I was kind of like in a dark place, and I finally was like, okay, I'm going to go see a mental health professional. And I've been seeing the same spiritual director since then. And spiritual directors are a little different than counselors, mostly because she focuses all of our discussions on scripture. Like, where's God in this? What is he saying to you? And it has just been so cool, because I think sometimes we can get caught up in like, even like God being this like far away thing, but he's such a personal God. And so I think it's just been super fun. Every time we meet, she's like, okay, where do you see God in this? And it's just been a helpful reminder of his faithfulness in the way that he provides. And there's this one time when we were talking and I was just in like a season of just really weariness and just felt like I wasn't going anywhere. And so we were kind of talking about like, well, what do you see? And I was like, I literally see me sitting on the sidelines of this race that I'm running, and I'm just sitting there, like I'm not running, and Jesus just sits there with you, even in that, like, it's okay to just like, he'll just sit with you wherever you're at. And I think it was just like a helpful reminder, like we're all on our own different races, running our own races and going at whatever pace we need to be going. Sometimes we're like running full out sprint, like life is good. And then there's other times when he's literally carrying us because we can't do it, or we're just sitting on the sidelines and resting. And that's okay too. And I think it's like, there's just like these moments, again, like those Ebenezer's of just like reminders of like, okay, like it's okay to just sit here with Jesus too, or it's okay to like trudge forward.
I have another podcast, Emily, and my co-host, Cheryl, she had a knee surgery this summer. And I would say we all are very similar. Like she just gets it. She does so many things. And in that moment of like sitting and just being and healing this summer, God just said, like if I took all the titles and roles away and you were just my daughter, would that be enough? And she's like, no, it wouldn't. And so like, it is that humility and like that working through that process of recognizing like, hey, or what you said earlier, holding onto these identities, holding onto these titles. And sometimes it's just about resting, and that it is slow and uncomfortable, but it's such a good learning process. So thank you so much for sharing. Is there any other things you wanted to share today before we wrap up?
I think this was such a sweet conversation. It's always so fun to see where things go and where the Lord leads. And, like I said, there's so many other facets of life that I could share. So I'll just have to come back another time. But I just want people to know that like the name of God that I love the most is El Roi. Like he sees you.
Well, he definitely sees you, Emily. Thank you so much for sharing. If people want to get connected to you, how can they do that?
You can find me on Instagram. Like I said, I am a fitness instructor. So if you want some like fitness motivation or whatever, that's Keep Moving with Emily. Or you can find me, my personal one, on Instagram as well.
We'll have everything linked for Emily in today's show notes. Emily, thank you so much for sharing today. Thank you for being vulnerable with us. And I appreciate you sharing about your journey.
Absolutely.
I'm grateful for Emily and sharing about her journey with MS and living with chronic illness and how it has shaped her faith. To connect with Emily, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Emily. Number 1, how may you be struggling with pride this week? I'd love for you to do a spiritual health check to kind of see, is there some room for humility? Because at times we are all going to need an extra dose of humbleness. Number 2, I love that prayer that she heard in college, Lord, hide me behind your cross. One, that statement just makes me grateful because God didn't have to do that for us. He didn't have to die on the cross. But also, it's just a simple prayer so that we can have on hand as a tool, maybe as a breath prayer at any moment. And so I'd love to do a simple breath prayer with you. We're just going to draw a breath in for a few seconds, hold it, say this statement, whether that's in your head, I'll say it for you, and then just exhale for 5 seconds and then hold it again and say the same thing. So here we go. I'm going to breathe in, hold. Lord, hide me behind your cross. Breathe out. Hold. Lord, hide me behind your cross. One easy way you can support the Parable Podcast is simply by sharing it with a friend. If you could pass along Emily's episode today, that really helps people find out about these stories of chronic illness and how you can overcome that. And thank you to my technical producer of a husband, Eric, for his stellar editing skills. That's going to do it for today. I'm grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your parable showcases how God is bigger than any identity you can ever hold. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.